On behalf of the Folk Education Association of America, FEAA, and the Folk School Alliance, I'm very happy to welcome you here today. Thank you so much for coming. This webinar demonstrates the FEAA's links and relationship with the Danish traditions and values of folk education and folk schooling. The FEAA was founded back in 1976 to assist communication, increase knowledge, and encourage the growth of programs among people interested in or experienced in the uses of folk education. So what is folk education? Well, it's an approach that promotes humanistic personal development, understanding of one's own and others' cultural diversity, and a commitment to community. For several years, the FEAA has focused its energies on supporting the growing folk school movement. And last year, we decided to broaden our efforts and launch a new project, the Folk Education Network. Through this expanded focus, we hope to reach and support organizations and individuals beyond those who identify with folk schooling specifically. So this webinar and those that will follow are all part of that effort. We would like to share a brief thank you to the AmeriCorps Office of Research and Evaluation for supporting today's webinar. And now I believe we have a slide to share, is that right? All right, so here we go. So I'll let you read what's there on the slide, and I'll just say that this webinar is supported through the Folk Education Network grant funded by the Office of Research and Evaluation at AmeriCorps through the National Service and Civic Engagement Research Grant Competition. Opinions or points of view that are expressed in this document are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official position of or a position that is endorsed by AmeriCorps. Okay. So moving on, speaker introductions. Dawn, the amazing Dawn. Dawn began work in grant-funded projects 28 years ago. She specializes in the development and management of grant-funded workforce development programs, though in the last 6 years, she's written and managed several research grants exploring folk schooling specifically. Over the years, Dawn has won grants for project implementation and research totaling over $35 million. So she is very well placed and well informed to help us here today with everything related to grant writing. And at this point, I am going to mute myself and hand things over to Dawn.
Thanks, Sylvia, and thanks, Mari. Such a pleasure to see all of you on the call and on this webinar. As Sylvia shared, I live and breathe grants. Whether it is as a writer or as an implementer, and in my day job also I work in a program office for a federal granting agency. So I've got all sides of this, from applying to grants, to managing grants, and now to writing the funding opportunity announcements. And I am excited to share with you my learnings and my understandings about this process. So what we're going to do today during our time together is I'm going to talk about where it starts. Sometimes folks don't really talk about that. And also about positioning your work and your ideas and how that can be of benefit to your grant application and your preparations for grant applications. The grant prospect research process, many times also when you get into looking at a grant opportunity, you might automatically think, yeah, I'm not listed in eligibility, but that is not the end of the story. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. I think it's very important to assess the impact of a potential grant and whether you can actually do it or not. So that's impact and feasibility. And then I'm going to talk about the actual funding opportunity announcement and how what you can glean from that might be little messages that the grant writers are sending you or explicitly telling you, and then writing it and how to avoid the common mistakes that I have seen on the other end in my role as working with awardees. And we'll talk about what are the chances. What are the chances that you're going to get this funding, and what does that mean? So that's the plan for today. And we will start out with where it starts. Now, many times when I have talked with grantees or with prospective grantees. And when I was writing myself, I thought about finding the funding opportunity as the beginning of the process, and that is not correct. In fact, the process starts long before that. In knowing yourself, your organization, and the vision for your organization, and that really starts with a very solid vision statement and strategic plan. A lot of the grants I would say a lot of the folk education organizations that I talk to regularly through the Folk Education Association of America are still in the process of developing a vision, developing their goals, and it might not be the time to look for grant funding. That it might be the time for your individual capacity building, and the capacity building dollars in a grant setting are very rare. Thinking about how do you stabilize what you are doing before you move into the grant arena and applying for grants is probably the best step right at the very beginning. But then really having a solid idea of what you're trying to change. What is the vision you have for the future that you are working on through your organization? What are your organization's goals? What are your needs? What are your community needs? And what capacity at the time that you're looking at a grant opportunity, what is the capacity that your organization has? And really, is the grant needed to achieve the goals and vision? When applying or when you get a grant, sometimes there's a lot of celebration that happens if you get a grant. And then the next day, or even in the next couple hours, you go, what did I sign up for? Because there are obligations and work associated with just managing the grant and communicating with your funding agency that are pretty onerous in some cases. So if you can achieve your goals without grant funding through donor support or other means of supporting your visions, you might consider holding off with a grant application. So this is this next part that I really enjoy. And again, this is even before you have found your perfect grant opportunity. And that is ideas. Thinking about your community, thinking about what you want to see in the world that is different and how you're going to make that happen. Your ideas about problems to solve, projects to launch, communities to reach, changes that you want to make in the world, services that you want to provide your community, enhancements to be made, and questions to be answered. I add that questions to be answered because recently I have been writing about and writing research proposals for grant opportunities and carrying them out. What is it that you want to answer about what's coming up and what you're doing and the change that you're making? What do you want to evaluate? That's another one. So this is a very creative process and can happen while you are doing strategic planning. I keep, often I call it the back burner or a parking lot or the magic bag of ideas that I draw from as I am doing, as I'm looking for funding opportunities, as I'm working through my days. I have talked with a couple people last week and they had great ideas. I have filed those away in my magic idea portfolio. We'll call it a portfolio. And when the right opportunity and the right time comes, then I can pull that up. So it is cataloging all of those great ideas. Sometimes when those ideas are shared, it's not the time, but that does not mean that you need to let go of it. You want to keep it in your mind, keep it in play at least a little bit, because you never know when there's going to be an interested funding agency in that match to those ideas. Okay. So this is where we get to positioning your work and ideas and what your positionality is. So for the area of folk education and folk schooling specifically, these are areas on this slide that I have looked into. That's economic development through craft, economic development through community organizing, uh, um, psychosocial benefits of craft, art, song, music, dance, and more. So cultural heritage, cultural connection, connection to the origins of your family lineage are other ways to think about this. We have a growing group of like farm schools within our membership and agricultural like activities. What is it that you are doing and where are you positioning yourself in terms of how you're trying to change your community or the world? Is it preservation? All of these areas are things to really think about where you are touching in what you are doing in order to position yourself within the scope of granting agencies. So I want to ask and have you enter into the chat. What's your positionality? Where do you see what you're doing in your organization? And if you're not quite doing it yet, because I saw those folk ed curious folks, what are you doing? Where are you positioned? Is it one of these? Is it something else? I'm interested. And please put it in the chat. Intersection between heritage and cultural connections, psychosocial benefits, climate education, absolutely. That is a big one and one that's growing and should have come up on my list here. Community connection and economic development, heritage craft and preservation, cultural economy through heritage traditions and agriculture. Cool. Psychosocial benefits, outdoor ed, absolutely. I was just visiting a bunch of folk schools and folk educators in the upper Midwest and seeing all of this makes me very excited and remembering all the fun that we had last couple weeks in our visits. New folk school, we're looking to build intergenerational community and build local economy. Absolutely, yay. Several of these. Glad to hear it, Chris. Good. I am always looking for where the movement of new folk schools is shifting. And I think these questions are really important. Democratic education, absolutely. So Mari's gonna put a link in the chat. Along with this interest about where the movement is going on our website, for those that have a membership, and keep in mind membership is free, there is a member tools and resources. And in that tools and resources, there's a grant management and grant development section. Over the last couple of years, I've been trying to build bibliographies where you can look at these different areas and find reference, where you could either do writing or you can support an argument in a grant application. So please feel free to go there and to look at those and download that. And if there are other items or other resources that you come upon, we will continue to build those lists. I find that having that resource library about what I'm doing and what my organization is trying to do really helps to position within different frames for grant funding and for donor relations. So, oops, and here I go. So these are some of the resources that are online. English language text, folk high school bibliography, the psychosocial benefits of craft, creative community development. The US-based folk schools is a survey report that I did in 2017, which I based much. Many of the grants that I have recently written for the folk schools and for the Folk Education Association on, and the economics of craft and craft economies as a course outlined by a professor in Amsterdam. This professor also it readily responds to email and questions that I've sent. So if you're interested and more interested in craft and economics and craft economies, I encourage you to reach out to him. I think he runs this course pretty regularly too. So that would be a good resource to tap into in preparations. Another resource that I've come across recently is a new book called Craft Psychology, and this is around the psychosocial benefits of craft. This researcher in Denmark, you can see that the title here is not in English, it is in Danish currently, is looking at the benefits of craft and working with a physician to see if they can validate craft as something that a doctor would prescribe for a person's mental health and well-being. This is being done with in certain contexts for song in the UK, where a physician or a mental health professional can prescribe singing, but only in certain populations. And she is trying to broaden that to the use of craft. And what she's found, which is really interesting, and I think I validate that in my own craft practice, is that the patient compliance with the prescription is much higher than other types of prescriptions. So for example, at one point I was managing a student mental health grant, and the data and literature was saying that exercise was and is a way of really helping with your mental health and well-being. And so we were partnering with the athletics department at a community college. And what we found was, and you might find when you have a gym membership, that you don't continue to go. So the compliance with the prescription of exercise doesn't bear out. However, craft and other cultural activities does. I'm a daily knitter. I don't think that I would be able to stay as steady as I am without my craft. And so I rely upon it. And I think that this researcher is finding that to be the case in her own research with other groups. Okay. Okay, so now we get to the fun part. Well, all of this is fun for me, so I don't know if it is fun for you, but that is looking at grant opportunities that are posted, that are local, and trying to see how those opportunities might match your magic bag of ideas. I always look for who in the area has received funding and from where they received the funding, like organizations or programs doing similar work. Have they received funding and from where? If there's a project that looks really interesting, I dive into that and look into where they might be getting their support. Who do you know? Who do your board members know? Who do your students know that might be likely funders for your opportunities? And always searching online. So local searches, state search engines, national agencies, and foundations are where I am signed up for many a listserv that comes into my inbox, and I encourage you to do the same. Some search engines or membership sort of grant searches. One is called Grant Forward, which I'm a member. I've also been a member for InfoSpin, if you're interested in more research related. TechSoup, which is, you probably know it if you're a nonprofit. It is a place where you can get discounts for different types of software, and they generally offer the Grant Station as a search engine. I get a daily email from Philanthropy News Digest that says who's gotten grants and who's offering them. And of course, grants.gov, where you can find federal grants. Minnesota, yeah, the state arts boards are great for that. We have we recently, the FEAA has been involved in a training. So not only for board leadership, but not only does that organization provide training, but they also provide funds. So even if you're looking for leadership development, that might connect you to a funding agency, the regional arts councils, a local community foundation, grant database at the library. That's awesome, Heather. I haven't looked there yet. Craft newsletters, absolutely. I know that the bulletin from the African American Craft Alliance is starting to include those grant opportunities, and also the Highlander newsletter at the very end also includes some grant opportunities that pop up. So it is about being connected to all this information within your positionality. Local philanthropy groups and regional arts councils, absolutely. The university grant department, Chris, that is a great idea. Many a community college or a university will have an office of sponsored projects, and they may also have listings of grant opportunities. And I'm saying that's a partner. You could have a partner in those higher ed organizations that can open the door for you. Rural Exchange, the Department of Transformation, Sustainable Farmers Associations, any professional associations that you have been involved in, they might also have listings. And you want to get on that grant list for serve. So many different places. It is about really cultivating your positionality and targeting the areas where you think you have the strongest argument for your projects. Okay. So this is when you're doing this prospect research, you're going to see a lot of different grant opportunities. Because contrary to what we might be told, there is no scarcity of grant funds. It is just finding the right ones and finding the right organizations and cultivating an understanding and a relationship in some cases with different funding agencies. So the more that you know about the funder that you are interested in and that you think aligns with your vision, the better you will be at responding to a funding opportunity. So I like this quote, until you make the effort to get to know someone or something, you don't really know anything. So many of the things at the beginning of this webinar that I advise you to do about knowing yourself, you also want to do that for the funding agency that you are looking at it. If it's an art organization, if it is a family foundation that has a specific desire to fund heritage or preservation, you want to get to know that funder. What is their organizational vision?
Yeah.
What are their goals? What are
What
their needs? And who do they fund? And what do they fund? Often a funding agency will list who their prior awardees are. Dig into those projects, see what it was, and don't be afraid to contact those grantees. As a grantee in the community college system, many a grant was awarded that I might have applied for and didn't get. And I talked with the other the actual grantees. And what did you put in your application? May I have a copy of your application? Now, if it is a private foundation, the application that you submit is your own proprietary information. If it was awarded and it is a federal or state grant, then the application becomes the property of the federal government. It becomes a property of the state. So you can ask for that and have them send it to you. If you don't want to ask them, you can ask for a public information request. But I have to say, I've received those before, and I thought, why don't they just call me? I'll give it. Um, so, but if you do, so what happens with a public information request is that the feds then send an email to the grantee asking for the grant application to be sent to the individual who has requested it. So take the middleman out and just contact the grantee. You may find that you can start a conversation and a dialogue with that person and find out what was it about their application, what that they thought was the trigger, what that they thought made their application the best and the winner of the grant opportunity. All about relationship. They might even tell you about other places that they've applied that you didn't know about. So again, knowing the funder, knowing what they fund, knowing what their priorities are, and really making that alignment with your own vision for your organization and your own organization's goals. All right. So this is a feeling that I've often got. Oh my gosh, this opportunity looks awesome. It's perfect. And then I look at the eligibility and my organization type is not listed. So, and this, I'll specifically say that for those of you that are on the call that are family farms, that might be an LLC, that a lot of the grant eligibility is for a 501c3 nonprofit. And it can be a little bit daunting when you go through and look at these grants and go through your prospect research and find not eligible, not eligible, not eligible, and or that you are just not listed on there. Now, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but there is a way to get around that, which is often encouraged by grant agencies as a means of sustainability for interventions or for actions that you might take and experiment with a grant, and that is through partnership. So if you are a mission-driven organization, whether you are a for-profit or a nonprofit, making connection with organizations that are adjacent to your efforts, that are nonprofits, that are higher ed institutions, that are different cooperatives, that opens up your eligibility. Now, it isn't always the case that you can find that, but it is a way for those that might not generally have eligibility. And I see, Lisa, municipalities often are listed in eligibilities, and cities and other agency partnerships, so that they might have eligibility that you don't. There's a folk school down in southern Washington state that has partnered with the social services and the food aid arm of the county. That opens up eligibility for that organization to funds that a social services organization and county has access to. So it's all about partnership. And why are the funders recommending this? The literature about intervention through grants says that partnership results many times and much more than individual granting in sustainability of the interventions, of the enhancements, of the programs that are launched. So building those partnerships is not only a way to access potential grant funding, it is also a means of sustaining those interventions after the grant ends. Okay, so you're doing all this research. You're finding these opportunities, you're positioning yourself, and you find that, oh, I missed that grant. I missed that grant deadline. That does not feel good when you find the perfect one, which that doesn't mean you missed it altogether. So one of the things about prospect research and about grants is that they often come in rounds, very similar, and sometimes the exact same grant opportunity will come up a year after year after year, sometimes twice in 1 year. So you're going to want to start yourself a grants database or a list. I recommend it be more, tech savvy than on a notebook, but if that's what you have, that's what you go with. And then you calendar it so that you are looking for these opportunities. Say that you missed it the last time, you're going to start looking for it at a minimum, probably 45 days before the previous grant deadline. So if it was May 30th last year, you're going to start looking in April for that grant opportunity to be posted. If it's a federal grant opportunity, the feds are moving towards a 90-day notification, which means that you have a little bit more time to get your ducks in a row for an application. Not all of the federal agencies are doing that, but they're looking at that as a means of helping those that don't generally get federal funds through grants, and that they're widening the pool of eligibility or of accessibility, really. So make a grant database, a list, and start calendaring that out and start looking for when they come around. With that list, sometimes when I've got a free moment, I go down the list to see if anything is posted, anything new is posted. I go to the organizational websites and look at who was funded the last time and what might be the notices coming up and put it on the calendar. Now you found the perfect one and you've got a lot of time to put it together and you think this is the grant, maybe. And I want to mention here that depending upon the agency or the foundation, they might say an RFP, they might say a notice of funding opportunity, that's a NOFO, they might say a notice of funding announcement, which seems repetitive, but that's how they do it, or a funding opportunity announcement. There are all kinds of different naming conventions depending upon where the grant is coming from. So watch out for these naming conventions. So I'll go back to this. It looks perfect. I've got one of these right now on the burner for a grant opportunity. I think it is perfect, but I'm not sure because I haven't done my work yet. And that the work of this is the impact report. And this is a mechanism that I use to put my thoughts in place about the grant and also the potential project. And it is also a means that I have used when I was an associate director of grants at a community college. Each grant opportunity that we were going to apply for required approval from my supervisors. So they would look at, is this grant appropriate to our mission, our vision, and our current goals? And I needed to report on that so that they could tell me whether I could invest my time in applying for this grant. And many times it was the times of support staff and also partners, because you want to be aware of that. I'm going to stop the show for a second and I'm going to share what I use as an impact report. Okay, so this let me go to the blank one. Oh, there we go. So this is available on our website, and I think Mari can put the link in the chat. I think I put it in the notes there for you, but if not, it's here. This is basically a template. You can see, put your logo here if you want to use this. So this is how I put together my impact report. What is the funding? What is the organization? What's the funding source? How much money is up for grabs? This here, match required. If you don't know this this terminology. You must know this terminology if you're looking and doing your prospect research. In some cases, the match requirement or the cash that you need to come up with, or the in-kind contribution you need to come up with to match the grant funds, can be 50%. I know that the NEA, most of their funding opportunities, is my recollection, it's 50%. And as a new or small organization, coming up with 50% of the grant is very difficult, in my opinion. And so that really helps me decide whether my organization has the capacity to take on this grant. Do I have the cash? Do I have the partners? Do I have the mechanisms for counting in kind? They also grant funding opportunity announcements will say how many they think they're going to award, how many grants do they think they're going to award, and at what levels. And each funding opportunity will most likely have funding priorities. What are they looking for? How are you going to write your positionality into this grant opportunity? Now, some funding opportunities are maybe a little ambiguous as well. So you do your best after you have learned about this organization to try to figure out what are their priorities. But you want to do as best you can in putting it into this impact report so that you can focus what you're doing, what you think is going to be what they will hear. So proposal deadline, one of the most common things that happens in grant applications is people missing the deadline. Usually it will be very specific, 5 p.m. Eastern time on this and such and such a date. There used to be, so the submission method, most of them I've been seeing electronic. And a lot of the agencies and foundations are no longer taking paper applications. So you want to be very careful about making sure that you have the submission method and format. And then one of the most important areas of a funding opportunity announcement is the rubric for scoring. Some don't have this rubric, but if they do, this is one of the things that you need to pay very close attention to. I'll go over this later too, but one of the most common mistakes in a grant application is that an applicant will spend way too much time on the front end of their narrative. And if you go and look at the scoring of that front end of your narrative, it's probably, not that many points. So my advice is that you spend a lot of effort in the areas where you're going to get the most points. And that many times is not the first thing that they're asking you. So this is a very important part of the funding opportunity announcement you should pay attention to. The second page on this template is where you're kind of outlining what are you going to do with the money? What are your deliverables? Who's your target audience? What is the institutional impact? What's going to happen to your organization? And what is the expected change? Any external partners? And then this is where that information that you gleaned from that funding agency about priority, matching that up with your organization's priorities and vision. And then this one, these next two are really important. Can we do this? And do we have the capacity to do this? Now, there is a wide range of funding from $100 to $200 little grants, tiny little grants, to millions of dollars. I tend to, when I'm looking for funding for the Folk Education Association of America and also for the Folk School Alliance projects, I pretty much don't look for anything that is less than $50,000. But when we started with an $8,000 grant, which we had just enough capacity, barely enough capacity to do that, to handle that and to handle the reporting. But as our capacity has grown, so have the amounts that I am looking for to fund different projects. And that I'll talk a little bit about that later. Also, you want to pay attention to that evaluation plan. Sometimes they will ask for that and a sustainability or scalability plan.
Dawn, in my
what
role as
is
host,
it?
I just want to give you a 25 minutes range. That's how much we have left. 25
Great.
minutes. Yeah.
Thanks, Sylvia. And then if you are going to use this with your board for approval, there's a little bit of disposition. This is an actual impact report that I wrote up for a grant that we currently have and were awarded. Funding source, brief description. Thankfully, this is a golden opportunity there, no match required. Yay. And so those are nice to find. There's the pool, the period of performance, funding priorities. In the application, I had to document which one of these or which several of these we were working towards in the funding priorities, and then looking at how this would impact our organization and our network. So one of the things about this, I can see, oops. Right away, I said to our board, we're going to need to hire somebody because we do not currently have this will necessitate, here we go, the hiring of a project manager right there. And this was for this grant opportunity, this was a new thing for us. We hadn't done this before. And so that was a big leap for our board to decide whether we were ready for that. Okay. So that is the funding. Again, this is available on our website if you want to use it. You'll see that this form is a little different than this one. I generally change this around every time that I apply for a grant. So I put the disposition at the top and then mixed these categories around to better fit what the funding opportunity was. And I do that almost every time. This document on our website is a Word document so that you can do that. All right, I'll stop sharing that. So that's the impact report. Notice we haven't even started writing yet. I can't emphasize enough that all this pre-work is so important. And looking at your funding opportunity and really dissecting it. Read every single word of that document and every document in the application package. You want to pull that thing apart. You want to attend the information session, whether it is in live or a recorded one. And what I usually do, because I'm a paper person, is I do print out the funding opportunity announcement and I start to highlight what I call flag words. Words like must, should, encourage, priority, any of those things, shall, if you're a lawyer, you're going to look for those words, because once you get the grant, it becomes a contract, and the funding opportunity announcement is really where all the information is, and or there are references to, particularly if it's a state or a federal grant. I'll tell you from my experience that there are attorneys that look at the funding opportunity announcements and advise us on the language that we use and what we can use. So many times we cannot say must, but in terms of what we're looking for, we will say highly encouraged, and that will bear out in the rubric of the scoring. Now, the people that write the funding opportunity in the federal area are not the ones that evaluate the grant applications. So there's a whole other process of readers who score and rank an award that isn't the entity that wrote the actual funding opportunity, which means that those writers are trying to signal. Look over here. This is really important. And you want to take advantage of that as best you can. All right. So once I've gotten the impact report done, we've decided we're going to utilize our resources to apply for this. Maybe you've got 30 days, maybe you got more than that. This is the process that the steps that I take. The clock is ticking. The impact report is done. Do we want partners? Do we need letters of support? We have an example of letters of support on our website. You can look for that. The way that I do letters of support is I look at the grant opportunity announcement and I type up a template. And I put your name here. And these are all the things that we think that we are going to do as a result of putting the impact report together. I might have a list of things that the partners might or might not engage in, and they can either add to that list or remove things and edit that letter freely. But it is basically already done for them if they want to blanketly take that template. Now, on the other end of this, when the funding agency sees that, I haven't perceived any deficit to say, oh, this letter looks like the last one. What they're looking for is that you have a partner, that there's a signature on that page, and also many times funding opportunities will ask for specific things in the letters of support, like a commitment of money or a commitment of resources that need to appear in there. And it's very helpful to provide a template to your prospective partners so that that process is easy for them and they know exactly what they are signing up for. And they don't have to read the whole grant package like you are. The third thing, which is unusual, this is what I encourage, but I don't know a lot of people that do it this way, is that I do the budget first. So I've done the impact report. I kind of have an idea of how we're going to use that money. And I look at specifically the budget. A lot of people start with a narrative and what we need and how you're going to write that in the proposal. But I start with the budget. How are we going to use this money and how does that relate to what ends up in the work plan? This is one of the things that a grant reader and scorer is going to really look at. Does your work plan match up with your budget? And does your narrative then match up with your work plan and your budget? So if all of those are aligned, you have a much better opportunity in the competition. The narrative and supplemental documents and anything else comes after that and are built from the work plan, built from the budget. If you have to go through an approval process 10 days out from application, and yes, please submit before the day it's due. I have a really funny story about submitting and having technical difficulties and then missing the deadline, which was heartbreaking at the time. But I'll tell you that even in those instances, you go back to your funding opportunity announcement and you see usually at the end of these funding opportunities, it says, if you had difficulty submitting, email this email to explain your situation and they might consider it. Now, in my case, I did email. I did have some technical difficulties. I was also not submitting early enough to discover those technical difficulties, but they did consider the grant and we were awarded it. So even if you miss the deadline, don't give up hope yet. Okay. All right. Now, the writing of this. Now, if you anticipated that you would have a writing workshop on how to write a grant, that is not this webinar, because the reasons are that they are all so different. So I'm going to go to common mistakes. I said this before, but too much effort on areas of low point value. I see a lot of beautiful introductions, beautiful need statements. And sometimes they have, and sometimes those areas have low points. Now, a lot of funding agencies are looking at sustainability or scalability as one of the really important things, and they'll put a lot of points there. But in the applications, what I've seen is that it's like a paragraph. You got lots of points there and only a paragraph of information. So really aligning your effort to the point values, important. The other thing that often I see is that you didn't answer the questions. So the granting agency has had specific questions or specific priorities in their grant application. And the writer, although writing beautiful content, is not answering the questions. And for someone that is scoring 10 to 15 applications, that is kind of annoying. So you want to make sure that you are answering the questions. And the other thing about that is that you are flagging those answers. So so that if you know, if in the grant application it said you must do this, you want to somehow in bold or flag or in your narrative spotlight that you have a plan for meeting what they've asked. So the other thing is not following directions. Read every word, every document, everything. Make a list of the requirements and use the correct format that they provided. If they have templates for you to use, don't create your own. Use their template. The readers are going to be looking at 15, 50 applications, and they want to be able to look on the same document for what they need to find. And if they have all different kinds of formats, they're going to have trouble finding it, and you want to make their job easy. The other thing is problems with the budget. Areas that look like that it is not reasonable, either and it's too low or it's too high, that raises questions about what's going on for your project that's unanswered. And then another thing that I've seen, especially with grants that come around very often, is that there's recycled content. And the other thing is an internal focus rather than an external. This is where capacity building funds are unusual. And that often funders are looking for what you're doing outside, not how you're building your internal capacity, but what are you doing for populations? Okay. So it was perfect, but I didn't get it. This will happen. This will happen. This will happen time and time again. Was it a waste of time? I say absolutely not. Any writing is good writing. You save that application for that bag of good ideas until the next funding opportunity comes. The other thing that I must always do is ask for feedback. They might not provide it. If it's a federal agency, and I think most states are required to if you ask for it. So you should definitely do that. But even if it's a foundation, it won't hurt to ask. So I didn't do, how to write your grant proposal in specifics. This resource is really helpful, I think, in doing that. I think that they're probably on the, 8th edition of this, and they're always adding additional content. A lot of new grants are asking for logic models. There's a section in this book that goes through that in detail, how to create a logic model for your grant application. All right. These are the resources on our website. You'll find the grant applications that were actually submitted and awarded under the grant narratives here. Starting in 2017 and I think I probably need to add the 2022 one. But the funding opportunity or the impact report is here, as well as other helpful resources, and that is on our website. And we are to the point where I'm open for questions. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I'm going
Awesome,
to stop
Dawn.
sharing so we
No,
get
that's
that.
great. We do have some good time and time for that, and we have some good questions. And move it over to where we have those. Okay, so there was a question earlier about whether the match could be another grant typically. And we did have a response from a participant saying sometimes, yes, it varies by grantor, but do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. I think that, yes, that's absolutely right. It depends. And many times that is the answer. Now, one of the things that that is specific to federal grants is that generally speaking, you cannot match a federal grant with federal dollars of any kind. Now, there are some I think the National Science Foundation allows that kind of match with federal funds and other things, but generally they don't allow that. It really just depends. And if it's not explicitly mentioned in your funding opportunity announcement, then it probably is included in the CRs. So whether you're a state agency or your federal agency, will have the regulations online.
Can you clarify
So,
what CRs stands for?
What does it stand for?
Okay.
I'll have to come back to that. But
Okay.
they're general federal guidelines for granting, and we can find that and put it in the materials that we send out.
Okay, next question is someone's asking, how involved is your board in the funding process, or how engaged are they in funding?
Well, I would say that it varies for so the different organizations that I have been involved with. I've been involved in a community college where the leadership, and I'll replace board with leadership, the governance leadership. I've been in places where they weren't very involved, and I like it when I put the impact report together. That was at a community college system where the leadership was very involved in what we were applying for and what we went for, and then also in cultivating the relationships that might be needed for partnership. So it depends. The way that I have done it generally is I am a primary writer. I have invited other people to write sections, particularly A, if I don't have time, and B, if there's some expertise in the leadership or that I can glean from. But in the end, I'm the primary writer and I review all of it and make sure that it comes to a fluid story in the application. And sometimes that means eliminating some of the writing that other people have done. And of course, there are often page limits. So
I'm going to keep going with the questions, and then knowing if we have time, we can kind of cycle back for more clarifications afterwards. But the next question is, it's actually specifically from Leah, visionary intending to found a folk school in Louisiana. She's asking, how might an emerging organization leverage small project grants, aka 2,500 to 5,000, to build capacity, particularly funding for staff and operations?
I think that this is all about really knowing what your goals are. And there's something that we say in community college world, stacking and latticing. So, looking at that growth in increments. And I think that's probably what you're doing. I'm so glad to see you here on here, Leah. It's been a while since we've chatted. Glad to know that you're still interested. And I would say that from the grantor perspective, what I have seen in and now the federal agency that I am involved in gives grants in the millions. And there's a section of the application where we ask about prior experience with grants. And those applications that are really well written and also eventually the project implementation, there's a really solid history of managing grants. And those little grants will help you with that. It is it's hard to find them, as you probably know. But doing that, stacking progression, and also filling out in a broad sense of all the projects that you're trying to do for your organization, yeah, that can be done. But we should talk one-on-one too.
Yeah, and if we have time, we'll keep going with that one, with that question, because there's a lot more to discuss there. There's a question, is it possible to know what the point values are ahead of time? You talked about paying attention to the point values.
It will be in the, if they're providing it, it will be in the funding opportunity announcement. Now there have been funding opportunities where I have Googled the funding opportunity and the office and reader information where the scoring wasn't in the FOA, but it ended up online. So, I mean, it was
You never
online.
know.
I wasn't
You never know.
cheating, right? So, if you have the time to do a little poking around, the other thing is that often older FOAs that are in the same funding category can give you an idea of how that agency scores. Also, those folks that applied the last time and requested feedback will probably get more information about the scoring. So if you have contacted somebody that got an award, you can ask them, what was the rubric used? Did you get that information? Because what often happens is that people get the report from the readers, and it'll say how many points in each area that they were awarded. And that kind of gives you an idea what the rubric was and what the totals could be.
And that's assuming the rubric was not made available, because if it is, then that's a great resource too.
Yeah,
right?
If it's available, like read every word and read it 4 or 5 times in your FOA.
Okay. There's a question, please give an example of signaling or flagging in narrative.
So sometimes the forms that you fill out will just be like an like a database entry field, right? Even bold text doesn't work. Even other types of things that you might do in a Word document to like make something stand out is not available to you. So in that, those are all those signaling. So you're gonna bold certain words. You might make them all caps, but not a whole paragraph. So that the reader's eye is going to be drawn to that. And you want to use the words that they used in the funding opportunity announcement. So don't change the terminology because you want to use the terminology that they're using.
Yeah, I was jokingly putting in the chat, like, follow directions, spoken as someone who doesn't always, but the gist that I was getting, I think, from what you said is this is not the time to like be outside of the box creative and use your own language. Is that right? Like use their language.
Don't do that. Use their language. Use their language.
There's a question,
authentically, obviously, you don't want to say you're doing something that you're not, but if it matches, if it syncs up with what you're doing and what you're proposing, use their words. Absolutely.
Because higher chance of getting it.
Right.
Yeah. Question, any tips for engaging a full team in the process of creating the impact report, especially determining capacity, or do you recommend that it really be decided by one person on the team with the big picture?
It depends. How engaged are your other team members in putting that impact report together? The program where I was an associate dean, we had a very strong team, and we were assigned by function. So there was somebody that did the fiscal someone that did the work plan, those two people would work together in looking at what the impact and what the project was. Others would do that. So if you do have a really strong team, it's all about communication, and a grant timeline, being very specific about what the deadlines are and when the material is needed. Because there's nothing worse, I think, than getting to submission day, which is 3 days before the deadline, and finding there's a whole section that's not done yet.
Mhm.
And that's another reason why at least 3 days before the
Okay.
submission,
So
you want to
tell
have it.
yourself it's 3 days before that actual deadline, just to
Right.
give yourself that wiggle room. Okay.
Right.
There's a question. I would love to hear more about how to target grant details for building an organization. Can you nest some infrastructure building into project applications?
You absolutely should do that. And it is, and so yes, you can do that. It is one of the things, particularly so for the Folk Education Association of America, which some of you might know, it's an old organization, but it had a hiatus and then came back in the 20 teens. And so it is very much like we are building a new organization. And so capacity was limited. I specifically used our strategic plan and the things that we wanted to do to look for funding opportunities that would match what we wanted to do and how we were building ourselves. So if we wanted to experiment with this type of programming, looking for that, and then building into the implementation plan, the structures, the policies, the procedures. Like we got this $8,000 grant to bring the folk schools together in a convening. We want to do more convenings, but we didn't have a travel policy, and we didn't have a reimbursement policy, and we didn't have, you know, we didn't have a bank account. You know, so even those very elementary little steps in implementing a grant can get you that more capacity. We now have Mari, a staff person on board, that we are building how that business plan will function afterwards, after the grant goes away. But it is, all of those steps. So you should absolutely do that, nesting that in
like
as
a
much
big,
as you can.
Yeah, and like to add that in there even of open a bank account, like things like that to make sure that you are building sufficient capacity. Right. So we're at 10:53, Dawn, believe it or not. So that's 2 minutes before we're supposed to cut things off directly to give time for survey. But we just wanted to thank you to everyone very much for coming to today's webinar. Many, many, many thanks to Dawn for all of her wisdom and guidance. And you did it, Dawn, you got it all in there within the time frame, with time for questions as well. Within 1 minute, I don't know if you want to take one more question or have anything that you want to say yourself as you wrap up.
I'll say, like I conveyed in this, I get really excited about opportunities, and the grant opportunities and that idea generation. So one of the, and I'll refer this back to services that I like to provide through the FEAA. And so as many of you know, I offer coaching, but and that can be organizational development coaching, but also if you have a specific grant opportunity that you want to talk about what's going into the impact report, or fill out a work plan, and just to have somebody talk about the grant opportunity, you can sign up for a time to meet with me.